Hi, and welcome to AXSChat. I'm delighted today that we have Mike Peters and Stephen Frost with us, and we're talking about the Inclusion Summit and the International Paralympic Committee. So thanks for joining us, guys. I just need to point out for those that are using captions that Mike is actually showing up as Eva. That's because he's using someone else's account. It's not his weekend name. So thank you very much for joining us. Mike, so can you tell us a little bit about yourself? You're the Chief
Yes.
Operating Officer of the IPC, and you've been working with them for a number of years now, and you're an ex-Paralympic soccer player, right?
That's right. Oh, that's right. Yeah. First, let me just say thanks so much for having me today. And I've been watching several of your Access Hangouts here, interviews, and they're all really cool. And I'm happy to be part of the group that you've interviewed. So thanks. Yeah, it's true. So I work for the International Paralympic Committee as the Chief of Staff here, and for a little while acting as our Membership Engagement Director, as we're kind of revamping that department a little bit. I competed in the Paralympic Games in 1996, Atlanta, and also in 2004, Athens Games in seven-a-side football. And that sport is for people who live with cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injury, or stroke survivors. I would have competed in Sydney, but we missed out by one spot. So, full disclosure, probably need to say that. I really enjoy what we're doing here at the IPC. I've been in Bonn, Germany now, where our international headquarters are located, for coming on 2 years. And before that, I lived in Seattle, Washington, in the United States.
Okay, great. And Stephen?
Hi there. So like Mike said, thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you. It's a great thing you're doing here. My principal role and link with the Paralympic movement was as head of diversity and inclusion at LOCOG, the London.
We seem to have
following that, I set up my own company with a few associates, and we now do inclusion work with companies and organizations worldwide.
Fantastic. And you're part of the Inclusion Summit coming up in Rio.
That's right, yeah. So I'm doing a couple of sessions at the Inclusion Summit in Rio, and that builds a lot of the work we did at London and previous games, and we're trying to pass on to future organizing committees. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I'm looking forward to the Paralympics. I think that London set the bar very high. I would say that as a Londoner, very much enjoyed the experience in 2012, and I even had the privilege of turning up to the Paralympic ball. So it really was memorable for me. But most memorable was the sport and also the change in people's attitudes that took place during the period leading up to the games and during the games. And it, for me, was fantastic to see how engaged people were. So can you tell us a little bit about what it was what the efforts were to sort of make sure that London was so engaged, and then what you've done taking that on for Rio, and how strategies have changed or you're building upon what you've done in London?
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to kick off on that. I think in London, the idea was really everyone's 2012. So the simple premise that this wasn't that we did the games and then you do a little bit of inclusion or diversity on the side, that in any way the Paralympics is an afterthought. It's the idea that actually this is up front and center, and that's what inclusion is, that it makes everyone's experience better, starting with the athletes. So I think really a couple of things we tried to do. One is that we made diversity and inclusion a dedicated program. So it was the first time in an organizing committee that there was this dedicated department, and we then kind of ran that from the center and took this philosophy and put it in everything, from the workforce to the supply chain to the 134 venues to everything that we did, and really tried to help folks can see inclusion as making the games better. we had to really try and challenge the philosophy that somehow this would be a cost on business or would slow down the operational delivery of the games. Instead, we kind of try to make it as a method of making a great event happen. So, for example, whether it's the client focus on transport or accommodation or security, or whether it's the way that we engage with the public in terms of tickets and media and so forth. I think the second thing, though, was the actual training of the folks internally. That perhaps they might have come in with the idea that this was in any way charity or something they had to do, rather than actually seeing this is actually making elite sport even better and more accessible to everybody. And so it was really saying, not why should you do this, but why wouldn't you do this if it actually made the event better. And I can go into a lot more detail how we tried to do that, but in a nutshell, I guess, it was really in 3 steps. The first was understand. So understand that actually making inclusive games is in everybody's interests, whether you have a disability or not, whether you are in London or not, whether you are male or female or rich or poor, it's in everyone's interests. And understanding that was important, that we all had skin in the game. The second thing then was about leadership, making it a personal responsibility. This isn't something that somebody else would do. It's what are you going to do? What are you personally going to do to make the games better? And taking on board as a personal responsibility. So everybody at London signed a leadership pledge about what they would personally do to make the games more inclusive. And then thirdly, it's about delivery. It's about show me what you do, not just what you say. So show me how you're making the opening ceremony more inclusive, or the tickets, or the security, or the athletes' accommodation, or the sports presentation. And through showing these little things that we did, we encouraged everybody to do more. And it was a tide that lifted all boats.
Mike, do you want to chip in? And I know then that Deborah's got a question to follow up afterwards.
Well, I would just say, Steve actually is a close friend of the International Paralympic Committee. We have asked Steve in the last year or so to help us also kind of further our aspiration, which is to provide for a more inclusive society through parasport. And he's really helped us, as we'll talk about probably in a little bit. One of our legacies really is providing for a more inclusive society, but more so even within our own organization, and then across our 170 plus national members, we're hoping to better provide some best practices in inclusivity and athlete leadership throughout the movement as well. So, been learning a lot from Steve, and look forward to partnering more in the future.
Thank you. Deborah? You're on mute.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you both for being on the program today. We really are very excited about partnering with the Paralympics. We just think it's such an important way to show how much we all matter and how we all add value. And Stephen, I know that you mentioned you had a company, so I wanted to make sure we did a shout out for it. It's FrostIncluded, which is www.FrostIncluded.com. So if the Paralympics believe in you, then I think a lot of other companies can believe in you too. So thank you for being on the program. Mike or Steve, whichever one want to answer. I think I, as being in the United States, I'm joining the chat today from Cape Cod, but I had followed the Paralympics in the past, but when I really seemed to really notice what y'all were doing was in the London Games. And so I know Neil talked a little bit about what you learned, and you're going into Rio, and I work a lot with multinational corporations, and one of the corporations said, well, we want to support the Olympics, and it makes sense to us. Why wouldn't we also support, the Paralympics at the same time? So I am curious about, have you seen more corporations wanting to sponsor, and is there an opportunity for them to get involved in other funding opportunities? Because I just really believe in what you are doing. I believe in the athletes. I like that Stephen's really making sure that inside you're all fully walking the walk, talking the talk, being fully accessible and inclusive. But how do we support what you are doing more? And when I say we, I'm doing it in a very broad sense of the word. Our community, sponsorships, funding, crowdfunding, things like that.
Steve, would you like me to start?
Sure.
Yeah? Okay. Don't worry, I will be phoning a friend here in a future question, but I'll kick off with this one. So I really appreciate the question, Deborah, and I think you're right. I think within within our movement, we would be able to pull out real special moments or contributions from each of the Paralympic Games in our history. But certainly, I think universally everyone looks at London 2012 as really kind of a tipping point for some a drastic step forward, kind of a paradigm shift stepping forward. And I have to say, honestly, I was at the closing ceremony in Beijing in 2008, and a couple of us expressly said how we felt bad for London because what we had witnessed in Beijing was so mind-blowing and incredible that how could anyone ever really follow up on this? And to their credit, London did exactly that. So I think for us, in terms of the interest, I think you see a couple of different things, and I hope it's okay to mention that I think part of the reason why we've seen some of the increase or the betterment since those games have been our broadcast partners as well. And one of those, chief among many, is Channel 4 in the UK. And we talked about this a little bit earlier offline, but I really recommend viewers, if they haven't seen it already, to check out their promo video for the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games. It's called their Superhumans video. And I think what's particularly cool about that video kind of is that it captures what has changed perhaps in some perceptions of people living with disability or impairment since the London 2012 Games. And that is that people can do and take pride in living their lives with their disability, with their impairment, through their disability or impairment, not in spite of. So sometimes you hear language that's about overcoming this or that, and that seems to miss the mark. That if you really, at least in my perspective, if you really understand someone who lives with disability or impairment, it's becomes part of who you are. It's actually a moment of or a locus of pride or strength instead of weakness. It's something that you claim as your own rather than something you typically try to distance yourself from. Maybe differences across people for sure, but that's, I think, kind of the message that we've started to engender from the Paralympic game in 2012, and particularly in the Superhumans video. I think rightly so, some people in the disability rights movement in the past have cringed when we start to talk about superhuman, or have been upset that the only people living with impairment or disability are those that are these incredible athletes, because they don't represent everyone across a group of people living with disability. But in this video and in our messages as well, you see people living their normal lives. So whether you're on the basketball court or whether you're running track and field or wheeling across the finish line, or whether you're picking up your kids and you live without arms, the guy that plays the drums with his feet, fantastic. It's about being, in essence, superhuman because we've embraced our identity and we've really maximized our abilities. And I think that's really the strong message and why people have become more interested in what we do, and a real strong legacy there with attitude change.
Before you go on, can I just make a comment to that? That's something that I really, in the work that I do, I always say, you know, just because a person has a disability doesn't mean that they're broken. The reality that we know is we're human beings and we have abilities and disabilities. Our lives change, our bodies change, but sometimes if you're an an athlete like both of you are, you are really tapping into some super parts of your your brain and your body, and you're really showing us what we can be as human beings. And so I have seen that superhuman video. I'm in the United States, but I watched it on YouTube, and it is powerful. And I think we should celebrate the best and the worst and everything else that we do to really make sure that we can tap into the full potential of the human being. And to me, that's what the Paralympics do. So I just wanted to mention that, how inspired we are with all of the work, not the inspirational porn, but go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, let me just come back, Steve, on that just real quick, because I really appreciate you saying that, and I realize that some of my remarks could be misunderstood. I want to emphasize don't mean to suggest that living with a disability or impairment is at times easy. I mean, sometimes it's really ugly, sometimes very difficult. Some of my teammates I used to play with on the team, the struggle that they went with just to put on a shirt in the morning was incredible. But I think at least what I have learned through my participation in the Paralympic Games and being a member of the Paralympic family is that when you can find the resolve or the strength to kind of lean into what other people would consider to be a weakness, or to lean into what other people would consider broken, and you can locate some strength there, some resolve there, and surprise yourself maybe in other ways in terms of how you're then able to relate to people. You can identify people might be suffering or struggling in a social setting where other people don't see that, or you help people, you know, learn to stick up for themselves in ways that they may not otherwise conceive of. I mean, just to suggest that there are kind of, you know, it seems to me that sometimes weakness can surprise you in terms of the strength it can help generate, and that's what we're trying to help people understand, and I think promote that kind of way of living through the business that we do.
I was just going to say, just to build on what Mike's been saying, I was in Beijing in 2008 when Sir Philip Craven said how great the Beijing Games were. And Mike's absolutely right. As a member of the London Organising Committee, we were pretty terrified at that point because we felt, wow, we really got a tough 4 years ahead. But I think to kind of build on what Mike's saying, and in the spirit of the questions, it's therefore not about trying to do incremental change. It's about flipping the norm, right? And I think for some people, the norm is still that disability is a negative, has stigma. And I think the best thing the Paralympics can do is not in any way apologize for that, but to flip it 180 degrees and say, you know what, you should just look at this stuff. You should look at this elite sport. You should look at what people can do. And one thing we were discussing before was when Channel 4 brought out the superhuman stuff 4 years ago, it was incredibly controversial, equally in the UK as in many other territories. But now 4 years on, of course it's still provocative by design. But I think that also it's a continuation of a new norm, of this idea actually that we are not apologizing, we are not going back, we are going forwards in terms of what disabled people can do, that disabled people are part of the media, are part of the discourse, are part of sport, and, you know, quite frankly, if you've got a problem with that, well, tough, you kind of get used to it because, you know, it's kind of what cool sport is and it's what inclusion is. So for me, that flipping the norm is so important. Not only in terms of what you can do with it, but in terms of the inspiration it gives people to think again about how you hire people, how you buy goods and services, how you design a sporting event, and so forth. And for me, that was just an incredible resource in the London Games, not in any way a drag or holding us back.
Yeah. I think that London was a real step change, and absolutely agree with you that people's perceptions have changed as a result of it. And I think that it wasn't just a sport, because Channel 4 did an amazing job around putting a whole festival of other activities around the Paralympics as well. So we had comedy, we had you know, people talking about taboos. We busted a whole bunch of taboos in 2012, and I think that's something that you know, that door's open now. It's wide open. So I know Antonio's got a question, so he's been sitting quietly for now, so I'll hand over to Antonio.
Thank you, Neil. It's really great to have the opportunity to have this discussion here today. And you know, after Beijing, we have London, and now we have Rio. We will have the Inclusion Summit soon. So we are basically moving, you know, 3 continents. And how do you see the impact of the work that you are doing in the way how people see accessibility around the world? Because, you know, we have interviewed people over the last 2 years from different areas, from different communities, and you know, is like in the digital world, all countries are in different phases. It's the same at the level of accessibility, where all countries are struggling with different processes and way at looking at things. So going back to the beginning of my question, how do you see the impact of the work that you are doing, and how it's spread to the different countries and to the different committees that are represented at the Paralympics?
Mike, you or me?
Go for it, man.
Okay, great stuff. So I think, look, for me, this is all about landing the legacy, right? And in one ways, one of the things we tried to do at London was not just plan for 2012, but plan for 2013 and onwards. Legacy is a massive issue, and there's always successes and failures, of course, and we can pick on many. But for me, I think some ones that have been really, worthwhile have been really almost in the design of stuff. So, for example, after London, we did a technical manual on diversity inclusion, which has now gone forward to future organising committees. So that practically, when you're thinking about transport or food and so forth, you can think about inclusion as a prerequisite, preemptively in how that's delivered. And again, how it can make it better for everyone, not just for a certain client group. So I think one is in the actual technical transfer of knowledge from games to games. But I think more importantly than that is the leadership. So the idea actually that this stuff only happens really if we want it to happen and we think it's important. And so I think in the work that colleagues throughout the movement are doing, they're taking this forwards. Mike mentioned some of the work that we're doing with the IPC right now in terms of leadership, in terms of how you inculcate it personally in the work that you do. So if you look, for example, we've already discussed media, how Craig and the IPC and how they're working with media partners to really kind of mainstream this. Or if we look at, for example, planning around accessibility at venues, or if we look at things like engagement with schools and so forth. I think it's the preemptive stuff that people can do. So there's the technical transfer of knowledge for sure, and I could mention things like recruiting interviews, giving guaranteed interviews to folks that have disability. Lots of things you can do in the HR space. In procurement, for example, mandating certain things of suppliers around accessibility, translation services and so forth that are mandatory going forwards. But it's really that leadership piece as well, that actually if you realize this makes it better for all clients and you want to lead on it, you can make a massive difference yourself.
Thank you. Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just in terms of the games themselves, in terms of the legacy of the games, I think we typically kind of shoot for 4 outcomes. One is, kind of the general infrastructure within a city, whether it be accessible transport, curb cuts, accessible buildings, and so forth. That's one idea that we try to promote and typically have pretty good success doing. The other is to try to develop some infrastructure within communities, local communities, simply for sport opportunities for people living with an impairment. Many places, not just isolated to the places in which we have the games, really are years behind offering simple opportunities for kids just to be active and play. So we look to help with that as well. We also look hopefully to increase the opportunities for kind of general social inclusion. So, I think what Steve has just referenced in terms of transport knowledge and so forth, different opportunities we have to hire people living with impairments during the games, the vision that people have of athletes when they're competing, I think leads to attitudinal change that can drive an increase in opportunities for things like employment, which I don't know about all the various countries, but I know, for example, back in my home country, the United States, employment continues to be, or lack of employment, continues to be the top, if not one of the 2 top challenge obstacles facing people living with disability. And the fourth one I just alluded to, which is general attitudinal change about what it means to live with impairment or disability, or chronic illness for that matter. Changing, as Steve said exactly right, flipping the narrative, flipping the norm. So that it's not about being broken or lost, but it's about wholeness and identity and strength, and living life as it comes.
Excellent, thank you. So I think that these are all key societal topics and areas that AXSChat fully wholeheartedly supports. One of the things that is somewhat different about the games is that there are some groups of people with disabilities that actually participate in the Olympics and not the Paralympics. So, for instance, I'm dyslexic. I would never qualify for the Paralympics, and also we've seen elite athletes with mental health issues also competing in the Olympic Games. But I'm interested in having the widest possible impact, and I'm sure you are too, because whilst the participants and the athletes may not be part of the Paralympics or maybe part of the other games, I think it's really important for an inclusive society to take a holistic approach to this. So what are some of the topics that are being covered during the Inclusion Summit that sort of addressing the future needs? Because obviously we're looking towards the future. We're always looking to how we can improve stuff. So what are some of the key topics that the summit is going to be addressing?
Mike, you or me?
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, I'll just quickly touch on that one. I think for me, look, it's going to touch on some really good stuff in terms of, you know, what's been done in the past, what Rio's done, what you can do in the future, not just with a view to Tokyo and onwards, but with a view to if you're a sponsor, if you're a colleague, if you're a stakeholder, any way of the Paralympics, what can you do? And I think it's about those practical actions and really show rather than tell that's really important. Some practical examples would be, you know, in Beijing, I remember like talking to a couple of folks, the organizing committee there, and you know, they just did 28,000 drop curbs in the middle of Beijing. They just made Beijing more accessible in about 6 weeks, which was mind-blowingly amazing. And you saw folks with disability impairments on the streets of Beijing really for the first time. They just kind of really made that accessibility happen. You know, in London, as Mike said, in terms of kind of legacy, we try to create a whole area of the south bank of the River Thames to be one unified walkway, which was step-free and accessible to all, not just, again, for those with physical disabilities, but those in the neurodiversity spectrum. But I think it's also about, you know, like you said, making inclusion real and meaningful for everyone. So I was really impressed when, for example, the Paralympics made sexual orientation part of their non-discrimination charter before most other organizations did. Or they reach out to other communities as well to say, you know what, you're all welcome here. And if you look at the kind of ticket holders that went to the Paralympics in London, you know, you saw every community, every color, every sexual orientation, every income group. And I think it's that mass appeal, making a disability part of a wider community, that's been really strong and I think real legacy. And that's the kind of thing we hope to bring out at the Inclusion Summit, whether you are a commercial partner, a stakeholder, interested in recruitment, procurement, business, whatever it is.
And Steve, do you want to mention quickly too the 3 kind of themes of the summit?
Sure. So I guess one is really this idea of understanding. You know, like, let's really get clear on what we're talking about here. Because I think one of the biggest barriers to advancing work in this area is that people don't really engage with it or understand what it's about and are somewhat scared of it, rather than realizing actually this is about them. It's about making this accessible for everyone. So understanding we all have bias, we can all make things more accessible, understanding the issues. A second then is about leadership, really. So we're going to hear from some great leaders there, some, you know, politicians, some business folks, some Paralympic leaders, in terms of how they're personally leading on these issues, what they are personally doing to make a difference. And then finally, some ideas of like practical things that have been done. So for example, we'll hear from the Rio folks on what they did within the diversity inclusion program at Rio, which probably hasn't made the headlines it should have done. And those kind of things we can hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So really understanding, leading, and then delivering about things that can be done.
Yeah, and I've seen the guidelines for Rio. They're really well developed. They've been there for a long time, really well thought out. So I think that's something, you're right, that they haven't really yet had the exposure they really deserve, because they did a good job in getting them done up front and early. I'm really interested in one of the areas that you touched on before, which was about supply chain, and these events are huge, and they have huge purchasing power, huge impact on society. So how do you think that we can leverage the power of the supply chain to drive innovation in inclusivity? Because I think this is an area where accessibility is at the bleeding edge often of innovation, and people need to seize the opportunity of these sort of these relatively rare events like the Paralympics that are, you know, bringing many countries and many organisations together. So how can we leverage this coming together to really drive progress forwards and deliver innovation?
Sure. Well, you know what, Neil? I'll admit on record that at the beginning of the London Games, I thought procurement was just dull and boring, and I wasn't particularly interested. Actually, procurement can change the world, right? And that's not an understatement. Basically, I think that the main thing you can do is to kind of engage with suppliers to say, we want to create social value. We don't want to just add cost to your business. So let's together find those things that don't add 1 cent to the supply costs, but do add massive, infinite social value. And we found them, right? So for example, at our Games Maker, our volunteer centre in London, we had to find somewhere where we could interview thousands, tens of thousands of people over a long period of time and select 70,000 volunteers to go stage the Games. We came down to 2 venues that were in final kind of stages. One appeared to be cheaper than the other, but actually over the life cycle of the project, the one that already had factored in inclusive design, so automatic doors, step-free access and so forth, was actually cheaper in the long run of the life cycle of the project than the one which appeared cheaper at first. It was only by focusing on that and including that in the spec that we actually ended up with a more inclusive outcome. Or, for example, mandating in the supply chain for labour force that we'd like everyone to have a guaranteed interview scheme for disabled folks. So again, that didn't cost anybody any more money, but it meant that folks with disabilities or impairments had guaranteed access to interviews for those jobs. Yeah. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs. So it was a big deal. And then in terms of legacy, what's been really exciting is those ideas of not increasing the supply costs, but increasing social value. We've seen those in other big projects in the UK and beyond. So High Speed 2, Crossrail, and so forth. They're adopting these same approaches to the supply chain, where we're saying to suppliers, we want to work with you on a commercial basis, but we want you to do X, Y, and Z, which are going to make things better for folks with impairments, better for all of us, but aren't going to break the bank.
Excellent answer. Yeah, I'm a big fan of procurement led initiatives. I think that actually, whilst it does seem at first dull, and it's not necessarily the key to everything, but it's a very, very significant role to play in inclusion, especially when you start looking at collaboration in procurement. When you're not just using it as one company, but you're leveraging multiple companies and bringing organizations together to say, look, it's not just me that wants it, we all do, and we all benefit. So great! I'm really excited over for both the Paralympics and the summit. I think we're pretty much at the end of our half-hour period, but I know Deborah's got one final comment, and so Deborah, do you want to wrap up?
Sure. Thank you, Neil. And I just wanted to agree with what you both were saying about procurement. I know in the United States, the USBLN, which is a business-to-business organization that's really trying to get businesses to talk about these issues together, they created a vendor program where they certify organizations that are owned by people with disabilities. And then they worked with the procurement people in a lot of major corporations to make sure that this was a group that they were considering using as vendors. And so I just think the more we do to put it in at the procurement level, we solve a lot of the problems. I always tell clients, if you add a statement in all the ICT accessibility procurements you do, that it has to be accessible, for all of us, then we're going to solve so many of the problems. So I applaud the work that you are doing. I think it's very powerful, and I think that the world is changing because you're showing, what we're capable of doing, and you're walking the walk. And I'll just say one more thing. When I visited Vancouver a couple of years ago, and they had the games, I don't even remember how many years ago, it was still one of the most accessible cities I had visited. So what we see as a society is every time the Paralympics are involved, it benefits all of us continually for years and years to come. So many, many applause to the work that you're doing. It's very important. So thank you for being on AXSChat.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if I could, just very quickly, I just want to say, when I first started in the Paralympic sport, I only found out about the Paralympic Games while in a medical anthropology class doing research for a term paper. I had no idea of what was going on. And I really want to thank you and let you guys know, too, how excited we are that you're our partner, social media partner for the Inclusion Summit, helping with conversations in the types of topics that you take on, the guests that you invite are really, I find them really engaging and inspiring. And I think, too, the conversations we'll have around the Inclusion Summit hopefully will lead to additional collaborations and partnerships that will help drive a more inclusive society. So hats off to you guys. Really appreciate you and for your support and interest in what we're doing.
It's a pleasure to be working with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks.